But first, let's talk about prisoners who could be released early under new government measures to tackle overcrowding in prisons.
Yes, the Prime Minister has said that the shocking crisis is worse than he first feared.
Yeah, he suggested that he's opposed to freeing violent criminals and sex offenders, so they're not going to be on this list of people who would get out a little bit earlier. But
it is expected that prisoners could receive early release after serving just 40% of their sentence. It currently stands at 50%.
Let's talk to former Justice Secretary Sir Robert Buckland, who's been put up by the Conservative Party today, and it's always good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. I mean, look, clearly, as the Prime Minister says, this is a situation in absolute crisis now, and this is going to require urgent action.
Well, it is. I think, though, if the government just merely points the finger at its predecessor and doesn't come up with other ideas about how to reduce the population awaiting trial, the remand population, then I think it will have missed an opportunity. And I think it's important that viewers know that we should be looking very carefully to make sure that serious violent criminals should not be released. The first point is that when I was in government, for people who got over 4 years, they were made to serve 2/3 of their sentences. That was a change I brought in, and that's got to be stuck to. And anybody on this scheme shouldn't be a domestic abuser or a stalker or an offender of that nature, because we should be maintaining confidence and making sure the public aren't put at risk. So I'd be very interested to see what type of person they're talking about and when they want to bring this in, because that's the other point. You know, they can't just immediately rush this through. They need to look at every single case to make sure that the sort of risk to the public is not present, and that confidence can be maintained in the system.
This is a crisis of your party's making, is it not? Do you not feel in some part responsible, considering you were Justice Secretary from 2019 to 2021? This crisis that is unfolding before our very eyes right now has actually been in the works for years. We've been warning about this for years.
Well, I can remember a time in 2009 when the Labour government was in, when this crisis had been reached then and people were being put in police cells. There's nothing new about this. We didn't hit this problem actually when I was in office, and I started the biggest single prison building programme since Victorian times, which is delivering prisons. I'm frustrated that it's not delivering new prisons as quickly as it should, and I really hope the new government just carries on with that programme and doubles down on it. Yes, there are always challenges in the system, and there are things that I would have loved to have done more of had I had more time. What I do hope with the new Justice Secretary is that they're able to stay in office for a good period of time and carry out coherent policies so that we can increase that confidence in the system. And I certainly am proud of the work that I did to reform the probation service, to make that more effective, to bring more people into the system to work, to supervise and to deal with offenders. But you know, it's really important that the government doesn't lose sight of the fact that prison is vital if we're going to protect the public from serious violent and sexual offenders. We should make no apology about incarcerating people for long periods of time. I certainly believe that, and believed it when I was Justice Secretary, and I don't want mixed messages coming from the government that somehow not using prison as a place to protect the public is okay. That definitely should be out of the question, and I want to hear that sort of message today from the government.
Well, I mean, to be fair, that is what we've been hearing from Sir Keir Starmer when he was talking about this at the NATO summit, isn't it? So it would seem that this isn't going to apply to violent offenders. It's not going to apply to sexual offenders. So on that basis, and on the basis, of course, as now people have to go before a board to decide if they are going to be eligible for release at whatever key stage. It sounds like you might actually support this idea.
Well, look, I am instinctively reluctant to support the early release of prisoners. I'll tell you, there was one occasion where I did introduce a scheme during COVID, and I only released 200 people who I thought were the least risk to our community, because some of them were very ill or, in a vulnerable position. Now, if they take that sort of cautious approach, then it could work. But you've got to be very careful not to just rush names through without probation officers and people in authority checking to make sure these people don't pose a risk. And I do expect ministers to step up to the plate and take a personal interest in these cases so that we don't end up with disasters with people offending when they should be inside.
You've mentioned probation a couple of times. I mean, obviously, if people are out earlier, they're going to be on licence for the duration of their sentence. So that is going to mean more work for the probation service. You said you got probation up to working really well, and perhaps you did during your time as Justice Secretary. But we do know now that, I mean, the probation service is quite frankly on its knees at the moment.
Well, I reformed probation and recruited well over 1,000 new probation officers, and I do think that whilst the challenges are real for probation officers out in the field, this is why the release scheme has to be very carefully calibrated so that we're not just putting people out there without any supervision. And this is where new technology can come in. We should be using far more of these tags. I was very, very keen on using tags to deal with offenders who are capable of supervision, and through that technology we can keep a very close eye on people, restrict their liberty, and make sure that the public interest is served. So with all those sort of approaches, I think we can start to make a difference in criminal justice. But for far too long, politicians just haven't wanted to talk about it. Unlike schools and hospitals, prisons and probation, nobody wants to talk about it because, of course, most of us never have experience of it, thank God. But now, occasions like this give us a chance to really put it front and centre, and I think that's got to be good if we're going to have a justice system worthy of the name.
Can I ask you about the latest Tory psychodrama, because it's not going anywhere, is it? Mrs. Badenoch, Kemi Badenoch, accusing the former Home Secretary Suella Braverman of having a very public nervous breakdown. How appropriate do you think those sorts of comments are, and do you actually think that's what the electorate wants to hear? More chaos, more infighting? It's like the party hasn't learnt its lessons from defeat.
Wow. Well, this is, look, I agree with you. The party that spends its time talking about itself is not going to get the trust of the British public. And that's exactly what happened last week. We showed that we weren't interested in the public and they weren't interested in us. So now's the time to forget about infighting and personalities and actually look at the values of what it is to be a Conservative. I'm back as Joe Public, an ordinary member of my party. I've been a member for nearly 40 years. I know what my values are. They're the meaningful traditions in our national life, our great United Kingdom, being proud of our country, and then making sure that whilst government is important, it gets off the backs of taxpayers as much as possible. Let's get back to those values first before we start worrying about who's going to have what job. And then I think the public might think, hey, the Tories have got the message and we're going to back them again. But the road's going to be a long one, and we need to start as we mean to go on.
What do you mean when you said the Conservative Party showed that we weren't interested in the public?
Well, in the sense that there was too much infighting and talking about each other, and that demonstrated, I think, to many, many voters that we weren't placing their priorities at the heart of our thinking. I've been relentlessly focused on the constituents I've served over the last 14 years, and indeed the wider national interests as well. Let's actually look back and look to the people for our inspiration, rather than worrying about what each other is doing and obsessing about internal Tory politics.
Okay, Sir Robert Buckland, really good to see you. Thanks very much indeed.